All right, listen closely because what we are about to talk about is essentially a masterclass in how not to handle a PR crisis, followed immediately by a masterclass in how to fix one. And honestly, if you were part of the internet mob that felt like something was fishy with the Try Guys recently, give yourself a pat on the back because your intuition was dead on. But before you get too comfortable, I need to tell you that the actual truth behind why the TryPod ended is so much messier, so much more financially devastating, and frankly, so much more human than any of us realized. We need to rewind for a second to understand the explosion that just happened, because when Keith and Zach first dropped the news that the TryPod was ending, the vibe was weird, right? It felt off. They gave us this vague, polished corporate explanation about being too busy and schedules not aligning, and we all sat there watching it thinking, okay, sure, you guys are busy, but you're ending a flagship show just because your calendar is full? It didn't smell right, and the internet, being the collective detective agency that it is, immediately started poking holes in the story, because we knew there was more to it. And guess what? We were right. But the reality of the situation is actually kind of heartbreaking. The backlash was immediate and it was fierce, primarily because fans realized that this wasn't just a show ending, it was people losing their livelihoods, specifically Rainey and Jonathan, who are beloved figures in this universe. And the idea that they were being let go just because the guys were busy felt like a slap in the face to the audience and a betrayal of the staff. It felt like rich guy behavior, right? Just cutting people loose because you want more free time. That is the narrative that started forming, and it was getting toxic fast. Which brings us to the pivot, the moment where everything changed, because Keith and Zach did something that most creators are too terrified to do. They came back. They released a follow-up video titled Why We Ended Our Podcast and Answering Your Questions. And let me tell you, the tone shift was whiplash-inducing in the best way possible. They opened with an apology, and not one of those ukulele-strumming, I'm sorry you feel that way apologies, but a genuine admission of failure, where they straight up said they failed to communicate properly, they failed to explain the timeline, and they failed to honor their own standard of transparency, which is a huge admission for a brand that is literally built on the concept of trying things and being open about the process. But here is where the dopamine hit comes in. Here is the juicy part that they tried to hide in the first video, but were forced to reveal in the second one. It was never about schedules. It was never about being busy. It was about cold, hard cash and the lack thereof. They admitted that the TryPod hadn't made a single dime of profit for over a year. Let that sink in for a second. A year. Imagine running a business division that is just bleeding money for 12 months straight. Why did they hide this initially? Probably shame, probably hoping they could fix it. But the financial reality they laid out is terrifying for anyone in the creator economy. They turned out their ad sales partner went bankrupt. Bankrupt! This is the stuff nobody talks about in the glossy world of YouTube. You have this massive infrastructure, you have employees, and suddenly the partner responsible for bringing in the revenue just collapses. They explain that the process of securing a new partner took 8 to 12 months, an entire year of uncertainty. And when they finally landed a new partner, that company got absorbed by another massive conglomerate. And despite all that hustling, the revenue never bounced back. They had a minimum guarantee, which is basically the safety net floor for ad revenue, but they never met the numbers required to trigger it. So for over a year, the rest of the Try Guys business was essentially subsidizing the podcast, paying for the production, the lights, and most importantly, the salaries of Rainey and Jonathan, out of pockets that were getting shallower by the day. This changes the entire complexion of the firing, doesn't it? It wasn't, we're too busy to record. It was, we literally cannot afford to keep bleeding money on a project that the market has abandoned. And that brings me to the most painful part of this whole saga, the part that had the comment section in shambles, the fate of Rainey and Jonathan. When the first video dropped, the anger was palpable. because fans felt blindsided. They felt like their friends were being discarded. But in this updated video, Keith and Zach clarified that keeping 2 full-time employees on a project that wasn't generating income had become mathematically impossible. Now, I know what you're thinking because I thought it too. Why not just move them? Why not just put them somewhere else in the company? Well, they addressed that, and it's a harsh reality check on how businesses actually work versus how we want them to work. They explain that the Try Guys don't operate with long-term cast contracts. Everyone who appears in their content is freelance. That's a precarious position to be in. They emphasized repeatedly that none of this was the employee's fault, which is crucial. But they also explained that rebuilding the podcast department to make it profitable again would require another massive ramp-up period, another long runway of losing money before making money, and they just didn't have the fuel in the tank to do it. They decided to make the call early to give Rainey and Jonathan time to look for other jobs while still being paid, rather than dragging it out until the money ran out completely, which, if you look at it objectively, is actually the more responsible thing to do, even if it hurts more in the moment. But wait, there is another layer to this onion, a layer of misunderstanding that drove fans absolutely crazy. People were asking, if Keith and Zach are so busy, why not just let the podcast continue with other hosts? Why not let Rainey and Miles or whoever else run the ship? It seems like a logical solution, right? Keep the brand alive, free up the main guys. Well, Keith and Zach shut that down with some brutal economic logic. In the first video, when they said they were busy, it implied that their physical presence was the bottleneck. But in the follow-up, they clarified that replacing themselves wouldn't fix anything, because the issue wasn't time, it was cost. Everyone who appears in their content gets paid. If they bring in new hosts, that's a new expense. If the show isn't making revenue, adding new hosts doesn't save the show, it just increases the burn rate. The podcast was a sinking ship financially, and changing the captain doesn't stop the leak. This is the kind of transparency we crave, right? It stops the speculation dead in its tracks. But of course, the internet sleuths found another contradiction that needed explaining. Fans pointed out, quite aggressively, I might add, that the Try Guys had recently hired 3 new employees. So the optic was terrible. You're firing Rainey and Jonathan because you're broke, but you're hiring 3 new people. It looked hypocritical, it looked like they were lying. But again, context is king. Keith and Zach explained that those hires were backfills. They were replacing people who had left earlier in unrelated roles. Those roles had to be filled to prevent the remaining staff from burning out. It wasn't an expansion, it was maintenance. Those hires were completely unrelated to the podcast's financial silo. It's hard to hear when you're emotional about a favorite cast member leaving, but from a business operations standpoint, you can't leave your accounting or production coordination roles empty just because your podcast is failing. They are different buckets of money. Now we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the moment that made everyone cringe in the first video, Zach's dad card. In the original announcement, Zach mentioned wanting more time with his newborn daughter as a reason for stepping back. At the time, it felt like a shield. It felt like he was using his baby to deflect criticism. And the internet let him have it. Fans questioned why other dads, and in the world generally, could manage their schedules, but Zach couldn't. It felt privileged. In the follow-up video, Zach addressed this head-on, and this was probably the most vulnerable moment of the entire update. He admitted he leaned too heavily on that reason because he felt guilty. He thought fans would understand the new dad angle and be softer on him. He admitted that he tends to overtake blame when he feels bad, and mentioning fatherhood wasn't meant to shift responsibility or imply that his daughter caused the layoffs, but he acknowledged that it backfired. He realized that by centering his desire for family time, he inadvertently made it seem like his personal comfort was more important than Rainey's job. Keith jumped in to add that wanting family time shouldn't be a negative thing, which is true, but they both conceded that it wasn't the real reason the podcast ended. The real reason was the money. The family time was just a nice side effect of the cancellation, not the driver of it. That distinction is massive. It changes the narrative from selfish boss to struggling business owner trying to find a silver lining. And you know what? The audience responded to this new honesty. The comment section on the new video is night and day compared to the first one. It went from pitchforks and torches to understanding and sympathy. Fans are saying they still wish the explanation had been honest from the start. And I agree with them on that. Never lead with a lie, even a soft one, but they appreciate the transparency now. It's a lesson in how smart audiences are these days. We can smell PR spin from a mile away. We know when we are being handled. When you treat your audience like adults, tell them the numbers, tell them the failures, tell them about the bankruptcy and the ad sales collapse, they will usually respect you for it. But when you treat